September 9th, 1980, Pacific Ocean. A massive cargo ship, the MV Derbyshire, is steaming toward Japan, carrying 150,000 tons of ore. Typhoon Orchid is approaching, a powerful storm growing more violent by the hour. The captain thinks he can handle it. Standard procedure: reduce speed, angle into the waves, ride it out. By dawn, the Derbyshire and all 42 crew are gone. No distress call, no final message, nothing. For nearly 2 decades, no one knows why, because no one wants to look. This is the story of the MV Derbyshire. Most people focus on the typhoon, the sinking, the mystery, but they miss the real story. This wasn't just about a storm. This was about an entire industry that didn't care when ships sank and sailors died. And it took one group of families fighting for 20 years to force them to care. September 9th, 1980, the MV Derbyshire is pushing through the Pacific Ocean bound for Japan. For 8 weeks, she's been sailing from the iron mines of Canada, crossed the Atlantic, skirted around Africa, carved through the Indian Ocean. Her holds are packed with 150,000 tons of iron ore. Her crew, 42 experienced seafarers, engineers, and deckhands. After 2 months at sea, they're looking forward to finishing this final leg. The captain is 47-year-old Geoffrey Underhill, a trusted British mariner with over 20 years of experience. His wife has flown to Japan to meet him after months apart. But there's one concern. Typhoon Orchid is approaching from the east. For days, Captain Underhill has been tracking conflicting weather reports. He's convinced he can outrun the storm, so he's held course, trusting his ship's speed and power. But now there's no escape. The nearest safe harbor is hundreds of kilometers away. Changing course would expose the ship's side to the typhoon's full force. What Captain Underhill does next is standard procedure. He reduces speed, turns the bow at a slight angle to the waves, a nautical maneuver used to stabilize vessels in rough seas. He also radios controllers thousands of kilometers away reporting severe weather. But over the next hours, the storm only gets worse. Waves swell to over 10 meters high, nearly as long as the Derbyshire herself. The massive ship climbs each wave, then slams into the troughs. Despite the heavy seas, there's no sign of distress. Captain Underhill stands firm. He knows his ship. He's seen worse storms. At nearly 170,000 tons, the Derbyshire is a steel fortress, nearly 900 feet long, longer than the Titanic, and nearly twice as wide. Towering 15 stories from engine room to bridge, each of her 9 cargo holds is the size of a 7-story building. And she's not just big, she's state-of-the-art, built to withstand the most brutal seas on Earth. Tonight should be no different. On board, everything is routine. The crew monitors systems, secures loose equipment, adjusts heading and engine power. They'll simply ride out the storm. But out there in the darkness, something unseen is already in motion. By dawn, the Derbyshire and everyone aboard will be gone. The Derbyshire fell silent on September 9th, 1980. No distress call, no final message, and for 6 days, nothing happened. The ship's owner didn't even report it missing. Maybe they were confident the ship had simply lost radio contact and would reappear. But the days stretched on. Still no word. It wasn't until September 15th that the alarm was finally raised. But by then, whatever happened was long over. An international search began. Air and sea units scoured the ship's last known coordinates, but they found nothing. No debris, no life rafts, no wreckage. Less than a week later, the search was called off. The media reported the ship's disappearance as an oddity. Smaller ships had weathered the typhoon just fine. The Derbyshire vanished without even a distress call. The official explanation: the sea had simply taken the ship, a conclusion drawn almost immediately. And just as quickly as the search ended, so did the news coverage. Authorities repeatedly dismissed calls to keep searching. There's nothing to be found, they insisted, nothing to investigate. But for the families left behind, it didn't add up. The search had been too brief, the answers too convenient. It felt like something was deliberately being hidden. Here's what they discovered. The Derbyshire was built only 4 years earlier at Swan Hunter Shipyard in Britain. She was part of a new class of ship called OBO, or bulk oil carrier. This meant the Derbyshire could sail from the Middle East to Australia loaded with oil, then make the return trip carrying iron ore. No empty returns, always earning, generating 20 to 30% higher revenues. The Derbyshire was one of 6 ships in a series called the Bridge class, ordered by Britain's leading shipping firms. But by the 1970s, Britain's shipbuilding dominance was slipping. Japan and South Korea were building ships faster, cheaper, and more efficiently. Swan Hunter, once a titan of the industry, was struggling to stay competitive, facing mounting pressure to cut costs. So whatever ended up dooming the Derbyshire might have been there from the very start. Peter Ridyard lost his son aboard the Derbyshire. Like other family members, he was desperate for answers. But Ridyard wasn't just a grieving father, he was an expert, a seasoned ship surveyor who knew the industry. And when he started investigating, he made a shocking discovery. In 1982, just 18 months after the Derbyshire vanished, another Bridge-class ship was caught in a violent storm. As the crew battled the North Sea, something terrifying happened. Massive cracks began appearing forward of the superstructure. The captain, fearing his ship would break apart, ordered an evacuation. The crew was airlifted to safety. Digging deeper, Ridyard learned this wasn't an isolated incident. Every Bridge-class ship had developed stress cracks, all in the exact same area, and one by one they were quietly being brought into port for repairs. Then, Ridyard uncovered something even more alarming. The ships hadn't been built according to their original plans. Several last-minute modifications had been made at the shipyard. Ridyard suspected shoddy workmanship and a flaw in the ship's design. Determined to expose the truth, he sent his findings to the Department of Transportation. But he got nowhere. Officials refused to listen. But the families refused to be ignored. In 1984, they formed the Derbyshire Families Association, determined to expose the truth. In November 1986, yet another Bridge-class ship was caught in distress. The Kowloon Bridge had broken up in shallow waters off Ireland's coast. While crossing the Atlantic in rough seas, her already weakened hull began to crack. The Kowloon Bridge was the only remaining Bridge-class ship that hadn't undergone repairs, other than the Derbyshire. And now, with her destruction unfolding in full view, the British government could no longer ignore the suspicions. An official inquiry was finally opened. For 6 months, experts, shipbuilders, and lawyers presented theories, but something was off. Peter Ridyard was never allowed to present his research. Despite a mountain of evidence pointing to structural failure, his concerns were barely acknowledged. On January 18, 1989, the official findings were published. No evidence of structural failure. The Derbyshire was just another ship lost to the sea. The families were outraged. They had spent years fighting for the truth, and now all doors had shut. For years, the families fought to keep their story alive. And in 1994, their persistence finally paid off. The International Transport Workers Federation, compelled by the families' plight, decided enough was enough. In May 1994, a team of investigators, funded by the ITF, traveled to the remote waters where the Derbyshire was last heard from. The odds were against them. The ship had vanished 14 years earlier. British officials had insisted finding it would be impossible, but they found the ship in just 23 hours, nearly 4 kilometers down, resting silently on the ocean floor. The Derbyshire was no longer just a name on a lost ship report, but it would take another 6 years to fully piece together the puzzle. And the haunting images made one thing unmistakably clear. Everyone was wrong about what really happened.
Let me tell you what actually happened on September 9th, 1980. The bridge of the MV Derbyshire is tense but composed. Captain Geoffrey Underhill and his officers monitor the typhoon's progress, adjusting course and running engines at reduced speed. Instruments flicker. The ship's steel frame groans as it pitches violently, plunging into deep troughs before climbing the next towering crest. Despite the rough conditions, there's an unspoken confidence. Their ship is built for this. But what the crew doesn't realize is that the Derbyshire is already beginning to lose the battle. At the very front of the ship, waves hammer the foredeck, sending thousands of gallons of seawater over deck fittings, hatches, and ventilation covers. Over the course of hours, the sheer force of the water damages or tears them away. Below is a space called the bosun's store. It gradually fills with thousands of pounds of water. The added weight pulls the bow deeper into the storm, allowing even more waves to crash over the deck. Ventilator tops designed to keep water out are further weakened. One by one, they're torn away, exposing machinery rooms and the forward ballast tanks below. These begin to flood, adding even more weight to the bow, causing the ship to ride even lower into the waves. On the bridge, the difference is imperceptible, but the Derbyshire is struggling, growing increasingly vulnerable to the oncoming waves. Massive waves now slam into the forward deck. The #1 hold hatch cover, about the size of a tennis court, gives way under the crushing force of water. Thousands of tons of seawater explode into the cargo hold. The added weight is merciless, forcing the bow to lurch even lower. The #2 hatch cover is next. Driven inward by wave pressure, it also quickly fills with water. As the bow sinks further, the massive ship is pushed to its limits, straining under the sheer weight. Then, the final blow. #3 hold gives way. All forward buoyancy is lost. The remaining hatch covers implode, setting off a domino effect, each collapse more violent than the last. Below the surface, the pressure collapses air pockets and tanks, tearing the vessel apart from within. The Derbyshire, the largest British-flagged vessel ever lost at sea, disappears beneath the Pacific. It wasn't a spectacular typhoon. 2 other bulk carriers had actually gone through the same typhoon, so Derbyshire should have gone through with no problem whatsoever.
The families had been wrong about what doomed the Derbyshire. It wasn't a structural failure, but a series of small compounding breakdowns. But that didn't matter. What did matter was their refusal from the very beginning to accept the official explanation. In the 1970s, hundreds of cargo ships were lost every single year. Seafarers were dying routinely. It's just the way it was. So officials weren't really hiding anything. They just didn't care. But through their years of persistence, the families forced an industry to change. Ship designs improved, rules were tightened, inspections got tougher. In the end, they didn't just find a ship, they changed the course of maritime history. And in doing so, they protected thousands of others who would one day sail the same seas. Remember the MV Derbyshire. Remember the 42 crew who died, and remember the families who refused to let them be forgotten. When institutions don't care, persistence matters. When answers are convenient, keep questioning. When doors close, keep pushing. The families of the Derbyshire taught us that sometimes the fight for truth is more important than the truth itself.